Lately, Elizabeth Warren has been getting a lot of praise from just about every corner of the Democratic establishment. All over print outlets like Politico and the Washington Post. MSNBC has almost nothing but glowing coverage of her. Even the biggest pro-corporate partisan hacks like Neera Tanden and the people at Third Way have nothing but kind words for Elizabeth Warren. There was an article I read a couple days ago, maybe a couple weeks ago, saying that Wall Street executives are warming up to Elizabeth Warren. I've seen some interesting takes on this in independent media. One of the most out there takes I've heard for why this is happening is that this is all part of a diabolical plot concocted by the establishment to divide progressives by placing a seed of doubt in their minds about Elizabeth Warren. I've specifically seen Cenk Uygur and others on TYT make this point. This is actually another evidence-free conspiracy theory. Anyone who really believes that this is the reason for the fawning praise is just working backwards from their conclusion that Elizabeth Warren is some fire-breathing progressive, even though that conclusion doesn't actually line up with the reality of her record and some of her policy positions. Occam's razor is the idea that the simplest, most straightforward explanation is probably what the reality is. The establishment says they like Elizabeth Warren because they actually like Elizabeth Warren. She is basically what they're looking for in a 2020 candidate. There's this false debate going on between people on the left with Elizabeth Warren, and it's whether or not she's as bad as Hillary Clinton. What I think the real debate is whether or not Elizabeth Warren is what the establishment is looking for in a candidate in 2020. In my opinion, that's a very short debate. I think most progressives don't see Elizabeth Warren as some kind of flaming lefty, even though she's the second best senator we have in the country. More often than we would like, her positions align with the centrist Democrats. But I decided to sit down and actually make a list of all the important areas where Elizabeth Warren is in agreement with the centrist corporate Democrats. And if we're being objective, Elizabeth Warren checks off most of the important requirements that they would like to represent the centrist establishment wing of the party in 2020. One of the first things that would be on that checklist is that Elizabeth Warren is wishy-washy on the issue of Medicare for All. No progressive who's being honest and objective can say with a straight face that they think Elizabeth Warren will go to the mat and fight for Medicare for All if she was the president. I've talked about this on the show many times. Before Elizabeth Warren decided that she was going to run for president, she avoided the Medicare for All fight like the plague. She did not co-sponsor Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill in the Senate. She never mentioned it at all during the entire 2016 presidential primary or the general election. And now that she's running, every time she talks about the issue of healthcare or is asked about Medicare for All, she tries to give us the runaround, somewhat paying lip service to the idea of Medicare for All, but then she pulls a bait and switch and starts trying to sell us the establishment corporate Democrats' alternatives to Medicare for All. Maybe a public option, maybe you lower the eligibility age from 65 to 55, maybe we improve the Affordable Care Act by expanding Medicaid and lowering drug prices. And mind you, this is before Elizabeth Warren starts taking all that sweet, sweet cash from the pharmaceutical industry and the private health insurance industry. She's made clear, and this is a point that I'm going to bring up a little bit later, that if she wins the nomination, she is taking that corporate cash and that billionaire and millionaire cash. So once the healthcare industry has their hooks in her by way of their donations, we can just completely rule out the possibility of Medicare for All happening in a Warren administration. And instead of being upfront about it and saying, you know what, I don't really think that this Medicare for All thing is possible, I don't think it's going to happen, I think it's a bad idea, like John Delaney has done, she's savvy enough to know that if she's going to win the nomination or get elected, she needs to at least pay lip service to the idea of Medicare for All, even if she's actually just gaslighting the left for their support. So her doublespeak on Medicare for All is exactly what the corporate Democrats are looking for in a candidate. She won't get booed off stage like John Delaney, But everyone who's serious and paying attention to the issue knows Elizabeth Warren's not going to fight for Medicare for all. She'll settle for some corporate Democrat half measure, some half loaf bullshit incrementalism. Now, to the point I made about money in politics, Elizabeth Warren has been gallivanting around the country during the primary talking about how she's not taking corporate money because it leads to corruption and doing favors for big donors, and that has led to the rigged system that we have now. I've even seen her take jabs at Joe Biden, talking about she has more time to do campaign events like rallies and town halls and actually talk to people because she's not doing big exclusive fundraisers with their donors. She's not dialing for dollars with these millionaires and billionaires. But at the very same time, she will also go out and brag about the fact that if she wins the nomination, she's definitely taking corporate money and billionaire money. Whether you take corporate billionaire money or not is one of those things that defines you as either a corporate centrist Democrat looking to maintain the status quo, or if you're a progressive looking to bust up the system and end the corruption and implement policies that the American people want. If you're serious about getting private money out of politics, that makes you public enemy number one to the establishment. But if you're willing to participate in the corruption as soon as it serves your personal ambitions, you fit right in with the corporate Democrats. So Elizabeth Warren's willingness to take corporate money is definitely something the establishment likes about her. And similar to Medicare for All, Elizabeth Warren's ability to talk out of both sides of her mouth on this issue makes her more palatable to voters as opposed to someone like Joe Biden, who doesn't have the common sense to at least pretend like he has a problem with the legalized bribery. He basks in the corruption out in broad daylight, and that turns voters off. So Warren being willing to take corporate money and her ability to rationalize the corruption is something that the establishment considers a plus. Another really big thing that's on any checklist for a candidate preferred by the establishment is the expectation to continue U.S. empire and the status quo of U.S. foreign policy. One thing I've noticed from almost everyone in independent media is that when they bring up Elizabeth Warren's foreign policy, it's usually just as a quick caveat that they have to throw in after praising her. They bring it up in the same way that pharmaceutical companies talk about the side effects of their drugs in commercials. Like it's just a quick point that they mention out of sheer obligation to avoid looking like unscrupulous people leaving out important facts. But let's actually talk about the real world implications of what Elizabeth Warren's, quote, bad foreign policy would look like if she was in the White House. She will continue the endless wars that cost trillions of dollars in taxpayer money and have also slaughtered millions of innocent civilians around the world. She will continue the absurd, outlandish contracts that we keep signing with defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Honeywell and Northrop Grumman, who are insanely corrupt and are profiteering off of war. Elizabeth Warren would not take on the rogue intelligence apparatus that needs to be dismantled. The agencies responsible for illegal torture and assassination programs and spying programs. I'm talking about the CIA and the NSA. She will definitely continue the drone assassination program that kills over 95% civilians and violates the Constitution and any rights to due process. The war on whistleblowers will continue under a Warren administration unabated. She has no intention of cutting the outrageous nearly $800 billion Pentagon budget. In fact, she voted to increase the Pentagon budget when the Republicans and Donald Trump asked her to when she was in the Senate. Prosecuting U.S. war criminals that were in the highest levels of government. You think Elizabeth Warren's doing that? You're fucking crazy. That's crazy talk. Out of the question, Elizabeth Warren would never prosecute the neocons in the Bush administration or the Obama administration or the Trump administration. She'll pull the same bullshit that Obama did. We're looking forward, not backwards. And the rich and powerful will get away with their crimes like they've have. So on foreign policy, Elizabeth Warren is quite literally everything the establishment could ask for in a presidential candidate. She's not some peacenik coming in there singing the praises of anti-interventionism and calling to end U.S. imperialism and close all the military bases and slash military budget. That's not Elizabeth Warren. So she's fine with all of the worst parts of U.S. foreign policy. She will continue the status quo of U.S. foreign policy unabated. Her foreign policy would literally be the continuation of Barack Obama's terrible criminal foreign policy agenda. Her proposal to deal with student debt and tuition at public college is actually the perfect corporate Democratic proposal. Like I touched on in a video I did earlier, and I think it was about Bernie Sanders' college proposal. Elizabeth Warren's proposal doesn't actually line up with the core left-wing belief that education, including college, is a right for all citizens and should be paid for with taxpayer money. So instead of making it a universal program that everyone has access to for free, like police officers and firefighters and libraries, she wants to make it means tested and have price caps. Corporate Democrats love that because even most of them understand there needs to be some kind of reform done to the education system. Partially because they know it's horrendous and unsustainable, but also public sentiment is reaching a boiling point and people are animated over the outrageous student debt crisis in the United States as well as the unaffordability of higher education. So they know that something needs to be done, but they aren't willing to go all the way and support 100% debt cancellation and free tuition for everyone. So with a proposal like Elizabeth Warren's, they take it as just an opening salvo in negotiations. Elizabeth Warren could never get Republicans or corporate Democrats to pass her proposal as is. They'll look at it and say, you think people in a household making over $250,000 a year can afford to pay for college tuition? Well, I think that number is lower. I think if you live in a household that makes $50,000 a year, your family can afford to pay for your own tuition. And that's exactly how it will go until they agree to a watered down education reform bill that is way short of 100% debt cancellation and 100% free tuition at public colleges. If you're someone like Bernie, you come into the negotiations with a mandate from the voters to treat education as a right to all citizens, which is the correct and easily defendable position. You will win that fight. But Elizabeth Warren does not view education as a right. It's something that should be means tested, and there should be a price cap to how much the government pays for your education, which is buying into the neoliberal framing of college education. Here's a huge one. Huge. 2 years ago, Elizabeth Warren said she's not in favor of primarying any corporate Democrats, not even Joe Manchin, who votes with Trump and the Republicans a majority of the time. Manchin voted yes on almost all of Donald Trump's ridiculous, absurd, insane cabinet nominees. He votes with them. He votes with Republicans more than any other Democrat in the Senate. Liz says, don't primary my Joe Manchin. In fact, she said, quote, let me make a spirited defense of Joe Manchin. When asked about it by Cenk Uygur, who was at the time one of the co-founders of Justice Democrats running primary challenges against corporate Democrats like Joe Manchin and Joe Crowley. And a quick side note, AOC is also a Justice Democrat who only got into Congress by primarying corporate Democrat extraordinaire Joe Crowley. Now, Cenk Uygur and AOC are singing Elizabeth Warren's praises and using their platforms to prop her up as some in the trenches progressive street fighter. If Elizabeth Warren had her way, AOC wouldn't be in Congress because she would know her place and she'd know better than to primary a powerful corporate Democrat. If Elizabeth Warren had her way, there would be no Justice Democrats. Arguably, Our Revolution, the organization that came from Bernie Sanders' 2016 movement, would not exist. In principle, Elizabeth Warren doesn't support the most successful grassroots movement to elect progressives in U.S. history because she fundamentally disagrees with primarying even the worst of the corporate Democrats. Also, it's even more egregious that while she's saying don't primary corporate Democrats, the corporate Democrats are actually doing everything in their power to take progressives out at their knees to ensure that no more of them get elected to Congress. Like I've covered on the show months ago, the DCCC made a new rule that blacklists anyone who works with progressive campaigns challenging incumbent Democrats. Progressives were livid because primaries are the only way progressives can actually grow their numbers in Congress. Elizabeth Warren had nothing to say because she doesn't actually agree with primary and corporate Democrats, even though it's the only way to get a progressive majority and get progressive policies passed. So for years now, there's been an ongoing civil war in the Democratic Party between the pro-corporate, pro-status quo, centrist establishment wing of the party, who are responsible for the collapse of the Democratic Party, versus the Bernie Sanders progressive wing of the party, who is trying to run the bums out of town and take control of the party. The corporate Democrats lost over 1,000 seats in state and federal legislatures, lost the majority of governorships in the country. One of the top priorities of progressives in the last few years has been to take over the party so that we can win back all of those seats we lost by running on a populist progressive policy agenda. But still, Elizabeth Warren's actions and words place her firmly in the establishment camp because she opposes primarying and getting rid of even the worst corporate Democrats. She doesn't mind Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer retaining control of the party. This is another reason why people in the establishment can get behind a Warren candidacy. This is another reason why people in the establishment can get behind a Warren candidacy. Everyone knows Liz would do endless apologetics and mental gymnastics to defend corporate Democrats who are actively blocking progressive policies like Medicare for all and free college and a $15 minimum wage, etc., because that's all she's been doing for the last few years. She's not going to call out the corruption in the party. Part of what all progressives agree need to happen if we're going to really get our agenda implemented is that along with having a trusted, reliable progressive fighter like Bernie Sanders in the White House, we need there to be a wave of progressives elected to federal office running on implementing Bernie's agenda. Elizabeth Warren wants us to think if she gets the nomination, she'll take the corporate cash and then she'll work with the corrupt Washington establishment in both parties to get bold progressive policies passed. Okay. If you believe that, I don't know what to tell you. This is a side point that corroborates the theory that I have here, that she's a good establishment candidate. This whole time, everyone has been convinced that Warren would be fighting with Bernie Sanders over a base of support because technically they are the two most progressive senators in the country. What has happened is something completely different that caught mainstream media and independent media off guard. Warren's base is made up entirely of voters who support corporate Democrats and despise Bernie Sanders and don't actually know or care about policies as their top priority. Emma Vigeland, who is one of Elizabeth Warren's biggest defenders, but is also a Bernie supporter, was shocked when she went to a Warren event and interviewed her supporters and basically found herself in the middle of a 2016 Hillary Clinton rally. So again, back to the question that started all of this. Why is the establishment now praising Elizabeth Warren so heavily? I'm going with Occam's razor. The establishment is saying they like her because they like her. And people like Cenk Uygur are trying to rationalize this and do mental gymnastics and say, oh no, they're not saying they like Elizabeth Warren because they actually like Elizabeth Warren. They're saying they like Elizabeth Warren so they could get the progressives to turn on her. Cenk, where's your evidence for that? You don't have any. It's an evidence-free conspiracy theory that you came up with on the fucking fly. Because the fact that the establishment likes Elizabeth Warren is not congruent with the message that you've been pushing, that she's some fire-breathing progressive. So when you hear something that contradicts your narrative that you've been pushing on your network, your gut reaction, your knee-jerk reaction is not to take it for what it is, that Elizabeth Warren may not be as progressive as you're saying she is. But no, this is part of some grand fucking conspiracy again again with Cenk Uygur and the fucking conspiracies, that is completely unfounded, unproven, there's no evidence of, but I'm gonna just say it and I'm gonna assert it as fact. I'm not even gonna just say it and throw it out there like, hey, yo, this is one of my wild theories of what I think is happening. I know there's no evidence, but this is just what I think. He doesn't even say it like that. He asserts that this is some type of fucking scheme to get progressives to turn against Elizabeth Warren. Cenk Uygur, Occam's razor. All I gotta say to you. Now, for being objective, like I've already proven, Elizabeth Warren is the kind of candidate that the establishment would like to back in 2020. She checks most of the boxes. So if everyone can just acknowledge that, I think an overall more accurate analysis of Elizabeth Warren begins to fall in place for people. It's impossible for Elizabeth Warren to meet the qualifications of a good progressive candidate and a good establishment candidate at the same time. Those things are mutually exclusive because the qualifications are the exact opposite. If Elizabeth Warren was a nominee, the establishment will not be biting a bullet. In fact, they'll be making no real concessions because on most issues, she agrees with them anyway. Progressives will be the ones biting the bullet and making all the concessions. We're the ones who are going to have to get over the fact that she'll continue U.S. empire unabated, that she'll take corporate money that would inevitably move her further to the right. We're the ones who are going to have to get over the fact that she's against primary and corporate Democrats. So she won't lead the charge like we know Bernie Sanders would to help progressives take over the party. We're the ones who are going to have to get over the fact that she won't get free college and that she won't cancel the $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. We're the ones who are going to have to get over the fact that if Elizabeth Warren's president, we're not going to get Medicare for all under her administration. So I need everybody to understand how silly it is that progressives in independent media like Cenk Uygur at the Young Turks and Anna Kasparian at the Young Turks and Emma Vigeland at the Young Turks and David Pakman and some other ones too. I find it silly that they're going around telling people not to worry if Elizabeth Warren's a nominee, that we should be happy, we should be grateful if Elizabeth Warren's a nominee. How is that? How can we be happy? Why should we be grateful if Elizabeth Warren's a nominee? I just went down the whole list and showed you how she is basically, she makes a good establishment candidate in 2020. So why would I then be happy and why should I then be ecstatic to go vote for her in November? And again, I'm not saying she's as bad as Hillary Clinton, but let's be real. On most issues, she aligns with the centrist establishment wing of the party that has been dead wrong on these issues for decades.